and a videotape of the booking and the coroner's report. So the full range of information that was available.
And Dr. Resnick, were you asked to provide an opinion on whether Colleen was suffering from battered woman syndrome?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Were you able to arrive at an opinion?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And would you please tell the jury what that opinion is?
Yes, it's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that Ms. McKernan did suffer from what's called battered woman syndrome, and that she suffered from that prior to the New Year's Eve shooting of her husband.
And Dr. Resnick, we're gonna try to stay specific to Colleen, because obviously we had a prior education lesson earlier this morning. Can you explain specifically with Colleen what requirements you found that led you to the opinion that she had battered woman syndrome?
Yes. In Ms. McKernan, I took a systematic history of incidences of violence where her husband had battered her, and there were at least 3 distinct episodes noted in my original report. One of those involved 2 episodes, but in formulating whether someone has a battered woman syndrome, there needs to be an assault and then contrition by the batterer afterward, and before the assault there's what's called a tension building phase, and it requires, the threshold for battered woman syndrome is relatively low, just that there are 2 of these cycles, and there were at least 3 before the New Year's Eve event.
And those were 3 episodes that Colleen had described to you the details?
That's correct.
Did Colleen have to have PTSD in order to meet the requirements?
No. In my evaluation of Ms. McKernan, she did not have what's called post-traumatic stress disorder, and if that is not required, there are many scholars in this area, and that's not labeled as a requirement in order to have battered woman syndrome.
Did Colleen have to have a learned helplessness in order to meet the requirements of a battered woman syndrome?
No. Again, learned helplessness is discussed by authors, but it is not a requirement, and I would not describe Ms. McKernan as having classic learned helplessness.
Did Colleen tell you that she had been in the military?
Yes.
Okay. And how can a military woman such as Colleen be quite fearful of her husband?
Well, certainly, if anyone can be fearful depending on the circumstances. It doesn't matter if they are, a big, large person. If the circumstances are right and Ms. McKernan perceives that she is at risk of being severely beaten or killed, then that is consistent with a battered woman. She does not have to be a shrinking violet or a very passive person in order to be fearful.
What role did Rob's intoxication during those events play in the occurrence of the battered woman syndrome?
Objection.
Sustained as to the form.
Doctor, did Colleen describe whether or not Rob was intoxicated during the events that you referred to, these 3 events?
Yes, she did.
And what role did that intoxication play?
Well, there are some women who are battered whether the perpetrator is drunk or sober, and so they might be fearful almost all the time. In Ms. McKernan's case, she learned that the only time she was severely assaulted was when her husband was intoxicated. So that set up a special fear when he was intoxicated, because all of the serious assaults occurred when her husband was intoxicated. So that means that she was able to say things to him, take him to task for things when he was sober, when he was at work in messaging, but when he was drunk is when she had reason to be particularly fearful, because that's when the assaults occurred.
And doctor, did Colleen express whether or not she had fear every day of her marriage?
She did not describe a day-to-day fear. She did describe when he was intoxicated and had assaulted her, then she pleaded with him to stop drinking, to get help to stop drinking, to get counseling so he would not be assaultive again, because she recognized that that's when he got out of control, was when he was drinking.
What significance, doctor, did you place on the names, and I won't go through those, but certainly the derogatory names that Rob would call Colleen?
Well, it's very common with a battered woman that a man will use demeaning names, suggesting that she is promiscuous, a whore, very demeaning names without a basis, as a way to kind of psychologically demean a battered woman, and that did occur in this case.
What significance did you place on the fact that Rob had promised to get mental health counseling and to stop drinking?
Well, again, when Ms. McKernan said, you can't do this, you can't lay your hands on me, I'm going to get a divorce, I'm not going to put up with this, then he would say, express his contrition, please don't leave me, I can't live without you, I'll kill myself, I feel so terrible, I promise I'll change, I promise I'll get help, I promise I won't drink the way I have. So that is part of what's called the contrition phase in the cycle. Tension building, assault, and then the contrition phase.
And doctor, without going through each and every detail, the jury has heard the kind of June incident in the bar parking lot. How did that incident specifically meet the cycle that you've been describing?
Again, Rob was drinking on that occasion. She tried to steer him home, without driving while drinking. And so tension built up where he was insisting that he would drive. She was saying, do not drive. And then, then there followed the assault of slamming her into the car door and window and holding his hand over her mouth where she couldn't breathe. And then after that, he knocked her to the ground. And after that, he said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, and expressed the contrition. So that was a classic example.
Have you seen other cases in which a batterer threatens to harm animals?
Yes, especially in a childless couple where a woman is very attached to animals. I'm sure you've all seen a childless couple where the dog is treated like a baby and very special efforts are made, and even have birthday parties for dogs and so forth. And in a situation like that, where a woman loves the dogs intensely, then a threat to harm the animals is analogous to a threat to harm the children. And that is a very serious situation because of when men kill their wives, one of the predecessors of that is a man threatening to harm the children. Here it was threatening to harm the dogs, but it was analogous because they did not have children together.
Doctor, did Colleen describe any jealousy or possessiveness that was going on in the marriage?
Yes, Colleen did describe to me jealousy, and when I saw the messaging between them...
Objection.
I'm sorry.
Sustained.
Doctor, other than any type of messaging, did Colleen herself describe incidences of either jealousy or possessiveness that was going on in the marriage?
Yes, Ms. McKernan did describe where where her husband would say, I don't want you to wear makeup. Another phrase was, I don't want you to dance like a whore. I don't want you having training, National Guard, where she would be with a lot of men, and he expressed a lot of restrictions, wanted her to be immediately available when he messaged her and to respond immediately. So the jealousy was evident.
And have you seen that kind of possessiveness or jealousy in other cases in which you have evaluated battered woman syndrome?
Objection.
Again, sustained as to the form.
Is jealousy or possessiveness a typical trait of a batterer?
It is common in batterers, yes.
And doctor, did Colleen describe to you any events that would happen after she indicated a desire to leave Rob?
Yes, when, again, the very first incident in May or June 2014, which occurred when Rob drank heavily, and that was the first physical assault, she said, look, I'm not going to stand for this, I'm going to get a divorce. And then he said, please don't divorce me. I can't live without you, and that's part of the contrition.
Okay. And again, without going through all the details, but did Colleen describe the November 13th, which followed into the November 14th incident?
Yes, this was an incident where, again, drinking was involved, and Ms. McKernan tried to set limits on this, and there was again a physical assault, but even the more important part was that the next she locked Rob out of the house. He broke the screen door, came in and put the pillow over her, and then she awakened in the shower after having been passed out, suffocated into passing out. And then he held a gun to his head and said, I'm so sorry, I don't deserve to live. And that kind of threat to harm oneself is a manipulation which was seen in this case and is often seen as a way to try and retain a wife after you batter them and promise to do better.
And doctor, did you find that November 13th, November 14th event, did you find that met the cycle?
Yes, it did.
Doctor, did Colleen describe to you why she just would not leave Rob?
She did. She explained a number of reasons. I think the most serious were that Rob had threatened her, that he didn't threaten her explicitly with killing her if he tried to leave, but he did threaten her by saying, I'll make your life a living hell. You're not going to get rid of me. I will tear up the flooring we put in the house. I will kill your dogs, again, like a threat to kill the children. Those were the most serious threats that he made. In addition, she was someone who didn't like to view herself as failing at something, and she wanted to try and make the marriage work.
Doctor, I'd like to talk about November 22nd, 2014, and again, without going through all the details, because the jury has heard that. What about the events from November 22nd, 2014 did you find which met a particular cycle?
Again, drinking was involved again, and Ms. McKernan tried to set limits on her husband's drinking. This led to arguments. He wanted to insist on persisting in drinking, and then when she cut off the credit card because she suspected that he might be using cocaine.
Objection.
Sustained. Ladies and gentlemen, you will disregard that last portion. It's not anything for you to consider as if it never happened. Go ahead.
Doctor, if you can continue, Colleen cut off the credit card, and then what happened?
Yes, she cut off the credit card, and then her husband came home, grabbed her by the hair, pulled her like off her feet into the other room, and then when he finally saw the credit card and debit card, he took it and left. So again, this was a third example, after which he again expressed contrition and promised to do better.
And doctor, how did this prior abuse that Colleen suffered affect her perception of a threat?
Anyone who has been physically assaulted is going to be more wary than they would be if they were not physically assaulted. That'd be true if someone had Battered Woman Syndrome or not. But if this has happened at least 3 times, then the literature, the scientific literature on battered women shows that women become very sensitive. They can be what's called hypervigilant, that is, very sensitive to the smallest thing, a change in facial expression, a change in the eyes that preceded the physical assaults are now noted and cause someone to be much more frightened than they would be if they had not had the earlier experiences. So the combination of her husband being drunk and menacing is going to cause her to feel more at risk of being harmed than someone who was not previously battered and did not have a battered woman syndrome.
Doctor, did Colleen explain to you whether or not Rob had blacked out during any of these incidences?
Yes.
And what is the significance of that?
Counsel, just rephrase your question and you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, is it common that the batterer will not always remember the incident?
That's really quite variable. If battering occurs during heavy intoxication, there is a fair chance it would not be remembered. Otherwise, it would usually be remembered.
Doctor, based on your education, background, and training, do you have a degree to a reason? Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of forensic psychiatry whether or not Colleen McKernan suffers from Battered Woman Syndrome?
Yes, it is my opinion that Colleen McKernan did indeed suffer from Battered Woman Syndrome before the shooting on December 31st, 2014.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mills. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
I know this wasn't intentional, but just the way the questioning went. You're not board certified in Battered Woman Syndrome, correct?
There is no board certification of Battered Woman Syndrome.
The way the questions were asked, it kind of sounded like you were saying you were, but I know it wasn't your fault, but you're not.
No.
And Battered Woman Syndrome, let me try and ask it this way. What's the DSM-5? DSM-5, do you know what that is?
Yes.
What is that, sir?
That's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual prepared by the American Psychiatric Association, 5th edition.
And Battered Woman Syndrome is not a recognized mental illness in that publication, is that correct?
That's correct.
I want to talk a little bit about the first incident you described. You indicated that Rob was drinking.
Yes.
Colleen was drinking.
Yes.
You said that she told you that he slammed her into a car door and window.
Yes.
Are you aware, Doctor, that she's never made that allegation in regards to that first incident?
I'm sorry, maybe I misspoke. Let me just check.
Let me just, I'll refresh your memory real quick. That's the one where he put his hand over her mouth and then she punched him in the face. And then he shoved her to the ground. Do you remember that incident?
Yes, I'd like to refresh.
Okay.
That's correct. He grabbed her by the head and covered her mouth.
Okay,
Yes.
so there was no slamming into car windows or doors on that date.
That's correct.
And she was shoved to the ground after she took a closed fist and punched him in the face. Do you remember that?
I know that she did strike him. Yes.
November 13th and 14th, she was drinking also.
Yes.
And did she tell you, Doctor, when you spoke to her that later that day when she got off work at 5 o'clock, she was driving home and she saw Rob in the parking lot of a establishment outside their neighborhood and that she pulled over and talked to him and that they went home together? Did she tell you that?
I'm sorry, would you give me the date now? Is this the 14th?
That would be the 13th and 14th of November.
Okay, when you say 5 o'clock, that would have to be the 13th or the 14th.
It would be the 14th now.
She did not phrase it in that way, but I knew that they resumed being together.
Well, she didn't even tell you about the incident in the parking lot when she was driving home from work, did she?
That's correct.
And on November 22nd, she kicked him in the groin before he grabbed her allegedly by the hair and drug her down the hallway, right?
I have that he shook her aggressively and screaming that one of the dogs went to bite him, and she was fearful for the dogs, and that's when the kicking occurred, yes, before the hair.
Well, if she described it as he was shaking her on the couch and the dog bit him and then she kicked him in the groin, that's not what she told you.
I'm sorry, I don't, would you rephrase the question?
You just made it sound like she was protecting the dog.
Yes,
But if she testified here that he was shaking her, and because he was shaking her, the dog bit him, and then she kicked him in the groin, that's different than her kicking him in the groin to protect the dog, correct?
Yes, that would be different.
And doctor, to get specific, in your report, you say, "It is my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that based upon Mrs. McKernan's account, she had a battered woman syndrome on December 31st, 2014. That is your language, correct?
Yes,
And your opinion was based on Mrs. McKernan's account.
that's correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Wells?
Dr. Resnick, Mr. Barr asked you if battered woman syndrome was a recognized diagnosis under DSM-5. Do you recall that question?
Yes,
Okay. Is battered woman syndrome a recognized syndrome in Ohio?
it is recognized by statute as relevant to admissible in court, and that is, so it's a syndrome, whereas a disease is something which is recognized by the American Psychiatric Association. A syndrome is just a collection of symptoms which does not rise to a mental disease.
Battered woman syndrome is real.
Yes.
Can you,
Overruled. As a syndrome, as a question in that way.
Doctor, can you describe the difference between malingering and lying?
Objection. I think it's beyond the scope, Your Honor.
Well, it is, right, counsel approach.
Dr. Resnick, in addition to Colleen McKernan's statements to you, you reviewed other materials in this case?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And without going into those other materials, did Ms. McKernan's statements and the other materials that you reviewed lead you to your opinion that Ms. McKernan was suffering from Battered Woman Syndrome?
Yes, I reviewed it all, right.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
You may recross on the,
No,
You
Your Honor, I
choose.
have no other questions.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Resnick. You may step down. Counsel, would you like to approach over here off the record? Just schedule. Well, there's no reason to break our cycle of today of having been up and down, so we're going to have an extra break, and we're going to take it right now. It's 3:35. I'll give you a break. I'll ask you to come back. I don't know exactly how long. It might be a short time. It might be a little longer. We'll figure that out in your absence. But I would ask that you report back to the jury assembly room in about 10 minutes, okay? That'll be about 3:45. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, don't discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else. Do not allow anyone to discuss it in your presence. Do not form or express an opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. We are in recess. You may be seated, everyone. We are officially back in session, although you can see that the courtroom is a little more empty than usual. It is now just about 4 o'clock today, and I brought you back for the purpose of telling you that we are not going to present any further evidence to you today, but I did want to provide you your extended admonitions because as we go forward, as I've mentioned, they become more and more important, if that is even possible. They're important throughout the trial, but again, as we progress, more and more information is out there, so you have more reason to be hyper vigilant about avoiding it. So ladies and gentlemen, please do not discuss the case. Don't let anybody discuss it in your presence. Don't form or express an opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. Do not attempt to independently investigate in any way, shape, or form through internet, through driving by, through anything. And please, please be vigilant and do your best to avoid any media coverage about the case. As we discussed in voir dire, no offense to the media, but they may not have all of it, they may not have it accurately, and you have to be, you've taken an oath to base your decision upon the evidence that is presented to you here in this courtroom. So allow your family or friends to scan the papers, decide your radio stations, choose something other than the news where these things are going to potentially be. I would like to have you back here tomorrow morning at 8:30 once again. Tomorrow is Tuesday. We do expect to be able to continue tomorrow morning, and I hope that you do have an enjoyable evening, and we will see you back here at that time. All right, we are in recess